President, we're not in a quorum call.
We are not.
Mr. President, first I ask unanimous consent that Ellie Charles and Ashley Crawford of my staff be granted floor privileges for the duration of today's proceedings.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the debt ceiling agreement that will soon come before the Senate is a clear and present danger to the fragile, indeed faltering, economic recovery. To say that this is the wrong policy at the wrong time is a gross understatement. You have to ask the question, is anyone paying attention? We just learned that economic growth fell to a 1.3% annual rate in the second quarter. And the first quarter growth was revised downward sharply to just 0.4%, virtually flat. The economy created a meager 16,000 jobs in the month of June, again flat, barely even keeping up with population growth. Last month, nearly 25 million Americans could not find full-time employment. Let me repeat that. 25 million Americans are effectively out of work. State and local governments continue to slash funding in jobs at a stunning pace, destroying an estimated 500,000 jobs in the last 2 years. Let me repeat that. In the last 2 years, state and local governments have destroyed an estimated 500,000 jobs. Now, those are consumers, too. Those are people that shop and buy cars and clothes and houses and go out to eat at restaurants and things like that. According to an article in today's Wall Street Journal, in the first half of 2011, all government spending fell at a 3.5% annual rate, enough to knock off 0.75 of a percentage point off the GDP. Now, on top of this wreckage, this so-called budget deal is proposing to slash funding and investment by $2.4 trillion over the next 10 years, an unprecedented step that will further destroy demand and directly kill millions of public and private sector jobs. This is what Mohammed El-Erian, chief executive of the bond investment firm of PIMCO, said just yesterday on one of the network shows in regards to this budget deal. He said, and I quote, "Unemployment will be higher than it would have been otherwise." This budget deal we're talking about, unemployment will be higher because of it. Growth will be lower than it would be otherwise, and inequality will be worse than it would be otherwise. He added, we have a very weak economy, so withdrawing more spending at this stage will make it even weaker. Mr. President, for months now, Washington politicians have been distracted by the phony, manufactured crisis about raising the debt ceiling. The city has been obsessed with this. The rest of the country, for very good reason, is more concerned with a far more urgent deficit than the budget deficit. They're more concerned about the jobs deficit. 25 million people out of work. In a recent CBS News, New York Times poll, 53% of the public polled named the jobs and economy as the most important problem, while only 7% named the deficit. So, Mr. President, I oppose this misbegotten, misguided deal that they have conjured up in return for raising the debt ceiling. Now, I don't oppose raising the debt ceiling. I want to make that clear. I believe we have an obligation, a constitutional obligation, to pay our debts and to make good on our debts, as we have done since the Revolutionary War. What I'm objecting to is the deal that was put together in order to permit us to perform our constitutional obligation. I oppose it for 4 reasons. Reason number one is that this deal will destroy millions of jobs, as I've said, in both the public and private sector. And by shutting off federal funding and investment, a critical engine sustaining our sputtering economy, it could easily plunge America back into a recession. Please read your history. See what happened in 1937 and 1938. We were coming out of the Depression, and all of a sudden, Congress decided to tighten down the screws and plunged us right back into a recession. Secondly, I have always advocated a balanced approach to deficit reduction, including both spending cuts and revenue increases. But this deal, the one that we're going to have before us this evening, I guess, rejects a balanced approach. It rejects any sense of equity and fairness. As my friend, the senator from New Jersey, said earlier on the floor, I heard him, Senator Menendez said, this is not fair. Are we concerned about fairness? Or is that just sort of passé? Is that just something that we shouldn't even be concerned about, whether something is fair or not fair? Well, I think we ought to be concerned about fairness. This is the message that's coming across loudly and clearly in my phone calls coming into my office, my emails that I'm getting from Iowa and around the country. This deal offends people's basic sense of fairness. That Congress would slash funding for things like student loans and cancer research and Head Start programs and VISTA and legal services, or cut essential funding for seniors, senior volunteer programs, senior centers, Meals on Wheels, cutting support for people with disabilities, cutting the safety net for a lot of the most vulnerable people in our society. We can do that, but we can't. We just simply can't ask one more dollar of shared sacrifice from the millionaires and billionaires who have made so much money in the last decade and who have received, thanks to this Congress, huge tax breaks. It is not fair. This deal is not fair. Third, I oppose this deal for the simple reason that I oppose paying ransom to hostage takers. Since the 1930s, Congress has routinely raised the national debt 89 times, including 7 times during the recent presidency of George Bush, 18 times under Ronald Reagan. Did Democrats hold the economy hostage? Did we say, oh, no, we're not going to raise the debt unless you do this, 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 and this? No. Oh, there's always a skirmish on raising the debt ceiling. Ever since I've been here, for the past 35 years that I've been here, 36 years now, always a little skirmish on it. But you know how it's always worked? If there's a Democratic president, then Republicans have to come up with half of the votes, 50% of the votes, to raise the debt ceiling. If there's a Republican president, Democrats have to come up with 50% of the votes. That's the way it's always worked, so that one side doesn't blame the other side for raising the national debt. Well, that's not the way it's working this time. That's not the way it's working this time. This time, congressional Republicans are holding our nation hostage, threatening to default on our national debt, plunge America into an abyss that we don't even know what would possibly happen, that would affect our bond rating for years in the future, affect the interest rates that everyone pays on their car loans or student loans, housing, and everything else. They would plunge America into that unless their demands are met. Let's be clear. This is not a negotiating tactic. This is blackmail. This is blackmail. Republicans have basically said, we will inflict grievous harm on the economy if Democrats do not meet our demands. Well, President Obama said it earlier, well, we're not going to go into default. Well, so with this kind of a lopsided deal, the ransom is paid, the hostage is released. But what a terrible precedent this sets. Make no mistake, Republicans will use these same despicable tactics down the road in the future. Now, if I sound like I'm picking too much on Republicans, let me just say, with this kind of precedent, I can see a Republican president, and there will be another one sometime, hope not too soon, but there'll be a Republican president, and there'll be a Democratic Congress, and Democrats will use this as a precedent. We'll hold it hostage. Is this the way we want to start running our country? What a terrible, terrible precedent this sets. It reminds me of the precedent that was set starting back in the 1980s with the use of the filibuster here in the Senate. Now, I say to the president here that I have for years advocated that we do away with the filibuster over a short period of time, that we allow things to be slowed down but not be stopped because of a filibuster. I didn't just say this now. I said it in 1996, if I'm not mistaken. It was right after we had lost control of the Senate, Democrats, I mean, and Republicans had taken over. And I even advocated doing away with the filibuster then because I said it's escalating. It's sort of a tit for tat. When the Republicans were in charge, we filibustered. And then when we got in charge, they filibustered, but they added a few more. And then when we got in charge, we filibustered, but we did it a little bit more than what they did. And this went back and forth. I predicted in 1996 that if we don't nip that in the bud, it's going to get out of hand. And sure enough, it got out of hand. And that's what I mean. That's what happens. You set a precedence like that, and there's no end to it. So I think the precedent that has been set, here, bodes ill for our country. Not just for Republicans, but for Democrats, too. President Obama had an alternative, however, to capitulating to the Republicans' hostage-taking and their blackmail. In remarks here in the Senate on Saturday and many times, and I urge the President to respond to this unprecedented threat by taking the unprecedented action under the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of basically eliminating the debt ceiling. I know the occupant of the chair, the distinguished senator from Delaware, has advocated this for some time also. It's deeply regrettable that President Obama preemptively took this option off the table. Throughout history, where meaning is unclear, where precedent is non-existent, the American people, through their elected officials and through their president, have acted boldly to protect the interests of the United States and to save our country. Now, I've heard it said that people around the president at the White House, well, they got attorneys to weigh in on this from the Justice Department. I understand that the Vice President said this morning to the House caucus that the authority was unclear as to whether the President could take such action. Again, I repeat, where there is no precedent, where the meaning is unclear, we can't run across the street to the Supreme Court and ask for an advisory opinion. They don't give those advisory opinions. But when the country's future, when it's in a crisis mode and our future is at stake, I believe the President can act boldly, should act boldly, must act boldly, both to prevent the country from falling into a crisis, but also to prevent this kind of hostage-taking, this kind of blackmail, that we either do it this way or we won't raise the debt ceiling. I pointed out in my speech here Saturday, I point out again, Thomas Jefferson concluded the treaty with the Louisiana Purchase And he himself wrote letters, and I have those copies of those letters. I've read them, letters to Senator Breckinridge, anguishing over whether he had the constitutional right to do this. In one letter he said, I believe Congress is going to have to pass a constitutional amendment and send it to the states for their ratification before I can do this. But finally, Jefferson came to the realization that if he didn't take this action, the whole western part of the United States at that time might never become part of the United States. Think about it. We might have been facing a part of the United States that belonged to Spain or to France if they ever worked out their problems. So Jefferson acted boldly. He acted boldly. In fact, there were critics at that time who said he didn't have the authority to do that. They had a vote in the House of Representatives on that, by the way. I got carried by a couple of votes. Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. There's nothing in the Constitution that gave him the power or the authority to do that. But he did it. He did it to save the country and to right an egregious wrong. More recently, Franklin Roosevelt. This is in the 1930s. You can read about it in the history books. In the 1930s, it was clear that if we didn't come to the assistance of Great Britain, it was going to fall to Nazi Germany. Not that they needed our men, but they needed our material. They needed the kind of material that we could supply in a short amount of time so that they could defend Great Britain against Nazi Germany. So Franklin Roosevelt concluded a Lend-Lease program. That's what it was called, the Lend-Lease program. Even President Roosevelt at that time said in his writings he considered this probably unconstitutional. But he had to do it to save our country because it was a crisis. And he acted boldly to do it. Now, there was no clear authority for him to do that. But as I point out, there was no prohibition against him doing that either. There was no prohibition against, explicitly in the Constitution, to prohibit Thomas Jefferson from making the Louisiana Purchase. There was no express prohibition against Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation. There was no express prohibition against Franklin Roosevelt signing the Lend-Lease deal. So again, I point out where meaning is unclear, and where in the 14th Amendment the meaning is kind of unclear. But we do have a court case, Perry v. U.S., 1935. Read it. Read what Chief Justice Hughes wrote in his opinion. He said quite clearly, that Congress has the power to borrow money. So that's a good thing. He says it might be used to save our country sometime. But he said Congress does not have the authority to alter or destroy those obligations. We cannot alter or destroy those obligations once we've made them. So as I argued here Saturday, and I continue to argue, that if Congress, either through action or inaction, destroys or alters those debt obligations, then I think it's up to the President of the United States to step into the breach. Now, is there clear authority for the President to do this? No. I submit there's no clear prohibition against him either to do this. And so, when I cast my vote later today against this deal, I'm not casting a vote to send our country into default. I would not do that. If I thought that my vote was the determining vote to send this country into default, I would not do that. That's not the way I see it, Mr. President. The way I see it is, even if we turn this down, the President can use his presidential power and authority to sign an executive order getting rid of the debt ceiling so that constitutionally we make good on our debt obligations. Read Perry v. U.S. I think you can see it there. So, if this deal goes down, either in the House or the Senate, the President can act before tomorrow to save this country. He may not want to do it, but he should do it. And he should have put that out there a long time ago. Each one of the three cases I mentioned, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Franklin Roosevelt, three great presidents took action to save the country. And they did the right thing. Mr. President, my fourth reason for proposing this deal is because, in truth, it's not about reducing the deficit. First and foremost, this deal is about preserving hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks for corporations and the wealthiest in our society. Bear in mind that this is the singular purpose and goal of today's Republican Party, not reducing the deficit, but preserving and expanding tax breaks for the wealthy. Here's why I say that. Back in December, last December, when Republicans demanded the deal to preserve the Bush-era tax cuts for the wealthy, that deal added a whopping $800 billion to deficits in just 2 years. This year, 2011, next year, 2012. Here we have it. We're being asked to raise the debt ceiling. A big portion of that, I've seen estimates as much as a third of that, is to pay for the $800 billion that's going in tax breaks to the wealthiest just in 2 years, 2011, this year and next year. Because of that deal last December, where the Bush-era tax cuts were extended for 2 years, the wealthy get $800 billion in tax breaks for 2 years. So now, what we're being asked to do is to pay for these 2 years of tax breaks to the wealthiest by slashing funds for the most vulnerable in our society. So, that's the game here. The game here is to preserve those tax breaks, even though we have to slash funding for the most vulnerable. In December, Republicans' #1 priority was preserving tax breaks for the wealthy, even if that meant adding hundreds of billions of dollars to the deficit. You get that? So last December, Republicans said we've got to extend the Bush-era tax breaks, 2 years. It added $800 billion to our deficit. I didn't hear a peep out of them. Not one peep from the Republicans. Now, in recent weeks and months, Republicans have repeatedly rejected grand bargains to reduce future deficits by nearly $4 trillion. Now, why did they reject the Reid proposal and proposals by the administration and others? Because each one would have required some modest sacrifice from millionaires and billionaires to help pay for those tax breaks they got. Republicans adamantly oppose this. Mr. President, in his remarks last evening announcing this debt ceiling bad deal, as I call it, bad deal, President Obama said the result, quote, would be the lowest level of annual domestic spending since Dwight Eisenhower was president, end quote. That bears repeating. President Obama said the result, quote, would be the lowest level of annual domestic spending since Dwight Eisenhower was president. Well, for the record, Mr. President, the American people do not want to take down federal funding and investment to the level of the Eisenhower years. To do so would be tantamount to repudiating all that we have done since then to make our country better and more fair, to make our country more of a middle-class society, more a country where people who can be born into poverty can aspire to be in the middle class, can get a good education, good health care, decent housing, a head start. To return to the spending of Dwight Eisenhower would be tantamount to repudiating the Great Society, programs. Now, we always hear from Republican friends how the Great Society was a failure. What a failure the Great Society was. Well, Mr. President, I respectfully disagree. Head Start, a failure, Great Society program. Medicaid, of course, Medicaid now is exempted out of this, but how about the Elementary and Secondary Education Act? Title I, where we have agreed to put money out to the states for helping low-income students, schools in poor areas. Great Society program. How about the Higher Education Act, student loans? Helped a lot of kids go to college. I have here a list of some of the Great Society programs. Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Age Discrimination and Employment Act of 1967, Job Corps. That's another one that's going to get slashed because of this Job Corps. VISTA, Upward Bound, food stamps, now called the SNAP program, that keeps low-income people having a decent diet during economic downturns. Community action programs that do so much for LIHEAP, low-income heating, energy, and assistance programs. Community action programs that do so much for the elderly and the poor. I mentioned the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the Higher Education Act of 1965, the Bilingual Education Act to help kids have English learners as a second language. I mentioned Medicare and Medicaid. How about the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, the Land and Water Conservation Act, Motor Vehicle Safety Act, the Wholesome Meat Act, Truth in Lending Act, and on and on. I'm not going to read them all. These are all parts of the Great Society programs. Made our country what it is today. We have cleaner air, cleaner water, better educated kids, better health care, better cancer research, all kinds of research done at the NIH. These programs, along with Social Security, undergird the middle class in our society. They create a ladder of opportunity to allow disadvantaged Americans to work up and to become part of the middle class. These programs define America as a decent, compassionate, and yes, as a great society. The President is sorely mistaken if he believes that the American people want to slash the budget to the level of the Eisenhower years and turn back the clock on half a century of progress. Mr. President, I hope that's not what you meant. I hope that's not what you meant. To turn back spending to the level of the Eisenhower years is not, to me, a bragging point. That is not something positive. To me, that is a big negative. What we need to do is to have a better and fairer tax system to pay for all the things that make our society great. We're not having the right debate here. We're not having the right debate. We haven't had the right debate for a long time. The debate ought to be about what's happening to our society. I just read a recent interview with Bill Moyers. Bill Moyers was asked what his greatest fear was. And his greatest fear was that we in America would accept greater and greater inequality, wealth inequality, as the norm. That we would accept a greater and greater inequality as normal. Well, here's maybe what he was talking about. From 2005 to 2009, the median net worth of Hispanic households went down 66%. The median net worth of African American households went down 53%. The median net worth of white Caucasian households went down 16%. The median net worth right now of a white Caucasian family in America is 20 times that of an African American family, 18 times that of an Hispanic family. This is twice the gap since before the recession, and it's the biggest gap since this data was collected by the Bureau of Labor Statistics since 1984. See what's happening? Our country's pulling apart. Fewer and fewer people at the top, getting more and more wealth. More and more people at the bottom, destroying the middle class. From 2005 to 2009, the median net worth, and I keep stressing median net worth. What that means is you take all the things you own, your house, your car, your TV sets, all the stuff you own, and you subtract that from all your debts and your obligations, mortgages, things like that. The median net worth from 2005 to 2009 of African American households went from $12,124 to $5,677. The median net worth of Hispanic households went from $18,359 to $6,325. Keep those figures in mind. African American median net worth of households in 2009, $5,677. Hispanic households, $6,325. That's their net worth. That's everything. White households, 2009, from 2005 to 2009, net worth went from $134,992 to $113,149. So as of just 2 years ago, the median net worth of white households was indeed 20 times that of African American households, 18 times that of Hispanic. Here's a Hispanic household. Net worth, $6,325, median for whites, $113,149. Again, that wealth, as I say, is the sum of all their assets, their houses, their cars, their bank accounts, minus their debts, including mortgages, loans, and credit card debt. The share of wealth. In 1988, the top 5% of Americans in wealth, in terms of wealth, the top 5% had $8 trillion in assets. That was 1980. In 2010, that top 5% had $40 trillion in assets. And that's more than 60% of the national wealth. The other 95% of America has the remaining 40%. Jim Wallace, president of Sojourners, Reverend Jim Wallace, said, and I quote, "A budget is a moral document. We're making choices," he added, "such as whether to cut $8.5 billion for low-income housing or whether to retain a similar amount in tax deductions for mortgages on vacation homes for the wealthy." As Senator Menendez said earlier, it's not fair. This is the debate and the discussion we should be having in America, in the Senate, in the House. This huge disparity in wealth in this country, and it's getting worse year by year. And yet our Republican friends say give more tax breaks to those at the top. Give more tax breaks. Mr. President, the American people get it. They understand this. They know there's 25 million of them out of work. They know that wealth disparity is opening up a huge gap. The middle class is being destroyed in our country. Destroyed. And this so-called budget deal is going to make it even harder for anyone to succeed in becoming a middle-class person. So Mr. President, again, just want to say that the most important thing that we can do right now, the single most important thing we can do is, I hate to say this, not, quote, balance the budget, which we're not going to do right now. Obviously, this just raises the debt ceiling. That's not the most important thing. Slashing government spending is not the most important thing right now. The most important thing is to marshal the forces of the federal government to put people back to work, to get jobs going in our society. And there's a lot of work to be done. There's highways to be built and bridges to be built and schools to be remodeled. New technologies, new power systems, new clean energy, a smart grid, cleaning up the environment. And anyone who's suffered through the heat wave in the last couple, 3 weeks knows something's going on in this country. Something's going on. So we need more clean energy. We need to make sure that those children who are born today whose parents don't have anything, whose net worth is so little they don't have anything, to make sure that they have decent health, that they have early education programs and Head Start programs, to make sure that every child has the best school and the best teachers in America, to make sure that our streets are safe, that our neighborhoods are safe so that families can go out and walk in the evening or at night and feel safe. Make sure that the food we eat is duly inspected so that we can have a high assurance that we're not going to get sick. To make sure that the drugs that we need, the medicines we need, are affordable. There's a lot of jobs that need to be done in this country, and we can put a lot of people to work. That should be the role of the federal government. Now, people say, well, I've heard it said many times, government doesn't create wealth, only private sector creates wealth. The government consumes wealth, it doesn't create it. I had a hearing in my committee about a month ago or so, the HELP Committee. We had the National Institute of Health down, Dr. Collins, Dr. Francis Collins, the head of NIH, had an interesting story to tell. It had to do with the Human Genome Project, mapping and sequencing the human gene. We did it. We did it. Tremendous scientific accomplishment. Dr. Collins headed that effort. So we mapped and sequenced the human gene. The Battelle organization in Ohio, a research organization, analyzed this and it said that we had put in taxpayers' money about $3.8 billion. $3.8 billion of your tax dollars into this. In the last 10 years, the private sector, because of this research that was done and mapping and sequencing the human gene, the private sector has put in over $790 billion investment, creating thousands of jobs all over this country, making huge breakthroughs in the genetic causes of so many diseases and finding interventions to help cure diseases and keep people healthy. That private investment never would have been done if we hadn't put $3.8 billion of taxpayer money into the NIH to map and sequence the human gene. The interstate highway system would never have been completed by any private company. But we did it through the power of the federal government. And you know what? It wasn't federal government workers that were out there working on that highway. It There's young kids like me when I was a kid working out on the interstate highway system, making summer money to go to college in the fall. And I didn't work for the government. I worked for a private contractor. So there's plenty of jobs that need to be done, and we need to put people to work. That is the single most important thing we can be about. And yet, what we're doing here, as I quoted earlier, we're actually going to make it harder. Economists say that the deal could complicate the task of putting people to work. There's broad agreement that the United States needs to pay down its debts, but most economists say the government should have waited a year or more for the economy to strengthen. We sure missed a big window of opportunity to reduce our debt in those strong years when asset prices were booming. This time is different. This time, instead, we're stuck trying to do it now when the economy is so weak, and we shouldn't be cutting and slashing. We should be investing and putting people to work. So, Madam President, again, I urge my colleagues to reject this misguided, counterproductive debt ceiling deal. Let's stop this precedent of taking a hostage of the United States until we get what we want. Mark my word, if we do this, it's going to happen again. And it's going to happen again. And then maybe sometime when there's a Republican president and the Democrats are in charge, then the Democrats will turn on the screws and we'll hold them hostage for something. Terrible way to run a country. Terrible way to run a democracy. So I urge my colleagues to reject this misguided, counterproductive debt ceiling deal. Let's join together to pass a truly balanced approach to bring deficits under control. One that first invests in putting people to work. And then as the economy begins to grow and the private sector begins to invest, then we start cutting spending, reducing the deficit. But let's have a balanced approach that will allow us to continue to invest in education, infrastructure, research, the other things that will create jobs and boost our economy. This is a job killer. This debt ceiling deal is a job killer. And a lot of economists agree with that. So we should reject it. And Mr. President, you have the pen and you have the executive order, and you can get rid of that debt ceiling. Take a bold action to save our country and say, no, we're not going to let any group of congressmen or senators of any political party take us hostage again. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the time until 8 p.m. be equally divided between the two leaders or their designees, with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I yield the floor.
Madam President. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the privilege of the floor be granted to the following member of my staff. His name is Robin Dutta.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, you've only been in the chair there for a couple of minutes, so I was going to ask you what's going on here today, but I think I have a pretty good idea. I've spent a fair amount of time discussing and thinking through what we ought to do in light of these big deficits. And we had the privilege of serving together as governors for a number of years, where we had a requirement to submit balanced budgets and to balance the outflows and revenues on an ongoing basis. In some cases, we had pretty good fiscal controls in place to help us. The rules were in place to help us, whether constitutional or statutory. Some cases not. Your state, I think my state, has a reputation for being fiscally sound operation. When I was state treasurer, elected state treasurer, and became treasurer in 76, 77, we had, as presiding officers heard me say before, we had the worst credit rating in the country, and we managed to climb from there by the time I finished my last term as governor to be AAA credit rating. We're very proud of that. Sort of relieved, if you will, today that it looks like we have in place a course that will enable us to preserve the AAA credit rating for our country and hopefully for our states around the United States. One one of our members of our caucus said something the other day that really struck a chord with me with respect to deficits and debt ceiling. What he said is, he said, we need a solution, not a deal. That's what he said. He said, we need a solution, not a deal. I could not agree more. I could not agree more. And while I'm going to vote for what is going to be presented to us probably tomorrow, I don't really regard it as a solution in the true sense. It's closer to a deal. And somebody may argue whether or not it's a good deal or a not so good deal, but I see it as a deal, not a solution. But the thing that's difficult for me is there was a solution out there. And it was a solution that a lot of people worked on very hard, including the guy who helped craft the last bipartisan deficit reduction plan in the Congress in 1997. As Erskine Bowles, who was then the President Clinton's chief of staff, and he worked with a lot of folks, Republican-controlled House, Republican-controlled Senate. One of the people he worked with, I believe, was a guy named Alan Simpson, Republican from Wyoming, pretty good deficit hawk in his day, still is. And the two of them and others came up with a deficit reduction plan that led to several balanced budgets at the end of the Clinton administration. A lot of people forget we actually balanced our budget a dozen years ago, not just once, not twice, but several times. So we can do this sort of thing. And the deficit reduction plan they came up with then was not just revenues. It was not just spending. I don't think it was just domestic discretionary spending or defense spending. As I recall, pretty much everything was on the table. They came up with a deficit reduction plan, 50% revenues, 50% spending, and as I said earlier, managed to balance the budget several times in a row. I like to say there are 4 ways to balance budgets. The first of those is to cut spending. A second way is to raise revenues. A third way is to grow the heck out of the economy. And the fourth way is to look in every nook and cranny of the federal government and ask this question: is there a way out of every kind of program, defense programs, domestic programs, entitlement programs, and ask this question: is there a way to get better results for less money or better results for the same amount of money? And if we pass this agreement, or what's being presented to us, it's before the House this evening, if we actually pass it in the Senate and they pass it in the House and the President signs it into law, we're going to see not the promise of the Deficit Commission's recommendations, co-chaired by Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson. We're not going to see the opportunity to reform or overhaul entitlements, to reform the tax code, to raise some revenues, not by raising taxes, but by broadening the base, limiting some of those $15 trillion worth of tax expenditures. But it is what it is. One of the things that we are going to have the opportunity to do, and probably a greater need to do, is this. We're going to need to redouble our efforts to look at programs, domestic, defense, entitlements, and ask that question: how do we get better results for less money? We had one former governor, presiding officer, Senator Shaheen, leaving, replaced by another former governor, and Senator Manchin, now our presiding officer, knows what it's like to make these tough decisions. He's had to do them for eight years. And just as an aside, I'd like to say this: there are 2 senators from West Virginia, born in West Virginia. That's the 2 of us. 2 senators that were former governors and former chairs of the National Governors Association. So we share a special bond. And, Mr. Presiding Officer, I'm talking about what could have been and what I think still should have been, and that's the Deficit Commission's recommendations, and broad-based, a real solution, not just a deal. But that's not going to happen, and whether we like it or not, it's not going to happen. The question is, what do we do? And what I was suggesting, Mr. President, is that we do at least more of what we're already doing, and that's trying to get better results for less money out of federal programs, all kinds of federal programs. The sort of thing that you and I did as governors of our state, the kind of thing that we're trying to do in the Federal Financial Management Subcommittee that I chair, formerly chaired by Tom Coburn. And we work across party lines. It's actually a pretty good example of how you ought to work to get things done. Democrats, Republicans on the subcommittee work together. We work with OMB. We work with the General Accountability Office. We work with Inspector Generals and all the departments of federal government across the landscape. We also work with nonprofits like Citizens Against Government Waste. And what are we working on? We're working on how do we get better results for less money, How do we not just identify fraud, but how do we get rid of it? How do we put a spotlight on agencies and departments and federal folks that are doing a good job, good result for the money that they're spending? And how do we put a spotlight on those that aren't and make sure we get get more good behavior, less bad behavior? And almost everything I do, I know I can do better. And I think the same is true of all of us. The same is true of our federal programs. And we have to really go for it. And I like to try to find opportunity and adversity. And Albert Einstein used to say, "In adversity lies opportunity." And I've been looking at this deal and trying to see where is the opportunity. And the opportunity is to just do a better job in evaluating performance, demanding higher performance, and working hard to get that performance, and working with the administration and those Democrats and Republicans here in the Senate. One of the reasons why I like the Deficit Commission proposal is because it addresses some of the uncertainty that currently faces the business communities in our nation, whether they happen to be large or small. And I've heard, I'm sure the presiding officer has heard from all kinds of businesses that one of the things they need from us is some certainty, some predictability. Businesses need certainty and predictability. I've had any number of CEOs, businesses large and small, who say to me, the reason why we're sitting on a pile of cash not investing our money is because we don't know what you're going to do on the budget. We don't know if we're going to have a default. We don't know what is going to happen to our tax code. We don't know if we're going to have an energy policy. We don't know if the Supreme Court is going to overturn, or the federal courts are going to overturn health care reform. We don't know if we're going to do something about our infrastructure, transportation or otherwise. All that uncertainty. Businesses are reluctant to spend money until we address those uncertainties. And one of the things I loved about the Deficit Commission recommendation, refined by the Gang of Six, is it would have addressed uncertainty with respect to a spending plan, getting us on the right track for deficit reduction. It would have been bipartisan, it would have been comprehensive. It would actually could have taken a big step toward providing some expectations with respect to our tax code. And we could use both of those. Well, that ain't going to be. We're going to have the opportunity to do, and Mr. President, I was talking today and listen a little bit to the news, and they're talking about who's winning because of this debate and who's losing. And I'd like to think that Democrats aren't big winners and Republicans are big winners. I hope the American people and folks we all represent are at least modest-sized winners. And for the President, among the things the President didn't want, he didn't want to have us to go into default, and was willing to bargain long and hard in order to avoid default, and I commend him for that. President doesn't want to have another debate over the debt ceiling until we get past the next election, and for him that was important. He just wants to be able to run administration, and as the governor, I remember how hard it was for us in Delaware to work in the governor's office on more than 2 or 3 big things at a time. It's hard to do, and this administration has had their hands full on this issue for months, and the inability to really work on some of the other things that they need to be doing to help run our country and move us forward. The other thing that I think was important to the President is he wanted to get us started on or continued on deficit reduction side and finding more savings and reductions. He didn't want to like slam on the brakes right away. And if I could use a car analogy, driving down the road, we've been driving around the road for the last couple of years trying to come out of this recession with both feet on the accelerator. And what the President didn't want and what I don't want is to go from both feet on the accelerator to both feet on the brakes. And one of the values of the plan that's being presented here is that we don't make that transition. We do start tapping on the brake and eventually do put the brakes on, but it's not just like that. So there's some things that are important to the President. I think on the Republican side, they wanted deficit reduction. They wanted it to be real. They didn't want it to be illusory. Neither do we. And they're unwilling to raise any revenues, even by reducing some of those $15 trillion worth of tax expenditures, tax breaks, tax loopholes, tax credits, and so forth. So we get, I think, for the Republicans who were focused on spending, didn't want to do any kind of revenues, even revenues that were being provided by broadening the base and lowering the rates. They weren't willing to go there. So I think for them, they can maybe declare victory. The question is, how about the rest of us? How about the people who don't work here and people who don't focus that much on partisan politics? How do they make out? And for them, it's sort of a mixed bag here. It's a mixed bag here. And if I were a teacher giving a grade in a class, I think I'd maybe assign it incomplete, because we have plenty of work to do. This idea of creating this bipartisan committee, joint committee of 10 people, 6 senators, 6 Republicans, 6 House members, 6 of those total would be 6 of 12 would be Democrats and 6 Republicans. I hope that works. I think my preference would have been take the so-called Gang of 6, the people that worked for a year on deficit reduction plan, which I think is a whole lot better, and just make them, if we're going to have a special committee, make them the folks on the committee. That ain't going to happen, unfortunately. But they would have been my nominees, my appointees, but it's not my decision to make. But anyway, we're going to create this joint committee. Sometimes I think if we can't come to consensus on good public policy, what we're inclined to do around here is just to do more process. And I hope and pray this is just more process. And I hope at the end of the day the men and women who serve on this joint committee will be open to our input, and certainly open to the input of some of the senators, including the Democrat and Republicans who served as on the Deficit Commission and who went on to be part of this gang of 6. The last thing I think I want to say is this. A lot of times in government, I hope we weren't quite as guilty of this in state government as here, but a lot of times in government we focus on symptoms of problems. We don't focus on the underlying disease or the cause of the problems. And I'd like to use a patient. A patient who's exhibiting certain symptoms, and sometimes you can look at those symptoms and figure out what's the cause of the problem and try to cure the patient. Here, the symptom has been all along the debt ceiling. But that's the symptom that the patient is exhibiting or is facing. The underlying cause of the disease is the way we spend money and raise money. And we're, I think, treating the symptom, avoiding the default on the debt ceiling. But I'm not entirely pleased that we're curing the patient, taking the steps to cure the patient. So that is sort of where I see this, Mr. President. I'm reminded, I'll close with these words. I see Brother DeMint, I think it's Brother DeMint over there. Yes? Waiting to speak, so I'll wrap up here. A guy who never served in the Senate, served over in the House, Rahm Emanuel from Illinois, Congressman, later Chief of Staff to President Obama for his first couple of years. And Rahm Emanuel, now the mayor of Chicago, has a saying, I think it's his original saying, but he likes to say, never waste a good crisis. And sometimes it takes a crisis around here to get something done. But he likes to say, never waste a good crisis. We've wasted this crisis. And we should not have done that. And we should have taken the bull by the horns. I wish the President had embraced his own Deficit Commission sooner, more robustly. I wish our own leaders, Democrat and Republican here and over in the House, had said, you know, that's a pretty good idea. Let's give that a shot. And unfortunately, they chose not to do that. It was bipartisan. I think it was bicameral, and it's unfortunate. But it is what it is. It is what it is. We need to move forward. And I would just hope that our colleagues will be given the opportunity to provide a lot of input to this bipartisan committee, joint committee that's being created, and that maybe in their wisdom, reporting back to us at the beginning of December, will be some of the elements in deficit reduction that were captured by that Deficit Commission that are missing in this deal that's before us today. And if that happens, this will have been a better outcome than I might have otherwise hoped for. With that, let me yield the floor and say thank you, Mr. President, and to yield to my friend from South Carolina.
Mr. President.
Senator from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. The last 2 years, 2.5 years really, have been remarkable in a lot of ways. We've seen a lot of things across our country that are beginning to change the political landscape here in Washington. After President Obama's election, with a lot of fanfare and hope attached, we saw a lot of changes begin here in Washington. A lot of new spending with huge stimulus plans that clearly have not worked. We've seen a takeover of the health care system and the financial system. But what we saw across America is really what encouraged me. We saw millions of Americans uniting from all spectrums of politics, coming together for Tea Party rallies and town halls. They were concerned about our country. They were concerned about the spending and the borrowing and the debt. And in these groups were liberals and libertarians and independents and Republicans and Democrats. People with all political beliefs knew intuitively, instinctively in their guts that we couldn't keep spending more than we were bringing in here in Washington without bankrupting our country. I joined a lot of those groups around the country, and these were hardly radical people. They were common-sense Americans from all walks of life who were just concerned about what we were doing here in Washington. They wanted us to get control of the spending and debt. We saw a lot of people here in Washington ignore what was going on. But across the country, many Republicans and even some Democrats were listening to what they were saying and made strong commitments that if they were elected to the House or the Senate, that they would come here and get control of the spending and the borrowing and the debt and try to return to some fiscal sanity, some concept of constitutional limited government that we had promised people when we take our oath of office that we would stand by. So we saw many new Republicans come to the House and to the Senate with a commitment to get control of the spending and debt, to save our country from this obvious bankruptcy that we're headed towards. The Tea Party was involved with that. It's hard for me to listen to a lot of the criticism of the Tea Party and their desire to balance their budget. There is no one Tea Party. What we're talking about are thousands of citizen groups across this country who are being vigilant about their government, which is what our founders asked them to be. They're not radical people. They're very common sense people, and they understand that what we're doing here in Washington is about to destroy the country. The term the Tea Party is being used here a lot to suggest it's a small radical group that's controlling some in the Republican Party. Over 70% of Americans agree with them that we should balance our budget, that we should cut spending and send a balanced budget amendment to the states to ratify. For every person who says they're part of a Tea Party, there are hundreds of Americans who feel the same way, who share those ideals of constitutional limited government and the concern and real fear that what we've been doing here in Washington has taken our country literally to the brink. It's deeply disturbing to hear the Vice President refer to Tea Parties as terrorists as he did today, holding a gun to the heads of Republicans and forcing us to make cuts. Clearly, Vice President Biden and many here are not listening to what Americans are saying and are trying to diminish what Americans are saying by suggesting this is part of one small group. The President showed right away this year, even after the November election, that he wasn't listening. He sent a budget here to Congress that increased the debt another $10 trillion by his measures, but really another $15 trillion if you look at it in any kind of objective way. And when the Republicans in the House demanded that they keep their commitment to cut $100 billion the first year, what did the President do? He said he would meet halfway at like $30 billion. He doesn't think we need to cut anything. He thinks we need to increase spending, and that's what he's been doing. This is the second crisis we've had this year. The first was this year's budget, where we came right to the edge of closing the government because the President and the Democrats do not want to cut anything. At least in the negotiations we see, if they're going to meet us halfway between 100, they start below zero if they end up at 30. They're not with us, and it's hard to negotiate with people who don't understand that we really do have a problem here. Washington, as Senator Rubio said, has a debt problem, but America has a jobs problem. But one of the things we need to understand is if we could stop growing the government, we could start growing the economy. More jobs would mean more tax revenue and less debt. But unfortunately, this president continues to make things much, much worse. He wants to continue to spend and borrow, but he won't take responsibility for his spending. He has failed to lead, and he loves to blame others. Sure, he inherited some problems. Every president does. George W. Bush before him inherited a recession. Reagan inherited double-digit inflation, double-digit interest rates. Yet they moved to solve the problem. The difference here is that Obama continues, after 2.5 years, to blame others, and his policies continue to make things worse. Let's talk about this debt ceiling for a minute, this debt crisis, and try to set the record straight. And clearly, President Obama has failed to lead in this whole process. We do need to remember, while he's trying to blame others for this debt ceiling problem, that it was a Democrat Congress and the President who signed into law the current debt limit that we have. This was not a Republican-created problem that we have. And for the last 4.5 years, Obama and the Democrats have controlled spending. So they set the debt limit, and they've spent the money to take us up to the debt limit. We've known for the last 6 months that we needed to deal with this problem. Yet the President submitted no plan at all. He just asked Congress to rubber stamp an increase of $2.4 trillion in our debt, to borrow another $2.4 trillion, and he said with no strings attached. He didn't want to cut anything when this whole debate started. No leadership. 6 months, no plan, just speeches, trying to shift the blame. And he likes to ignore the fact that the House passed a bill that would solve our problem. It was a bill called Cut, Cap, and Balance. It cuts spending right now. It controls spending out over the next 10 years. And it sends a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution to ratify. The response from the Democrats here in the Senate and President Obama was truly astounding. The President says he wants a balanced solution, but he does not want a balanced budget. He's actually called us extreme for wanting to balance the budget, and has said we can do our job without a constitutional requirement to balance the budget. We can do a job on America, but we're not doing the job that we were sent here to do, and we certainly have proved that we cannot control spending unless it's by law that requires us to do that. Even though this bill passed the House by a large number with some Democrat support, and it gave the President a $2.4 trillion increase in the debt limit, but only if we cut spending and controlled it and created some permanent accountability. We sent it to the Senate, and the leader of the Democrat Party would not even allow it on the floor for any debate because he saw the polls. He saw that already, with just in a couple of days, that 70% or nearly 70% of Americans supported the approach of cutting and controlling spending and creating some permanent accountability. So it was pushed aside so that we could make some more backroom deals with no transparency, no accountability, no leadership. I commend Speaker Boehner, Leader McConnell, the Republicans that have worked through this process. Dealing with people who won't put a plan on the table is very difficult. The Republicans passed Cut, Cap, and Balance. Then they followed up with another plan that wasn't so good, but it was a plan, and it didn't even get past the front door here in the Senate. For 6 months, no plan from the President, no plan from the Democrats. Now we've gotten a deal with a partner who does not want to cut spending. After a November election where we were sent here and the country pleaded with us to get control of spending, borrowing, and debt. You can look at this deal two ways. There are really two realities here. From any Washington standard, this is an historic sea change in the way we do business. Instead of what we were doing last year where we were talking about how much more we could spend and how much pork barrel of bacon we could take home, at least this year we're talking about the fact that we need to cut spending. So we can say the deal makes progress in that respect. But in the real world, a dollars and cents world, we have to realize that our country is on a path towards bankruptcy right now. We're projecting adding another $10 or $15 trillion to our debt. No one's going to lend us that amount of money. We don't have 10 years. This deal does not change that trajectory at all. We will still borrow $10 trillion or more in the next 10 years. We will still add $1 trillion a year to our debt. We cannot call this a debt reduction bill. We can really not even call it a spending reduction bill. For the next couple of years, it hardly cuts anything. And when we talk about cutting in Washington, we're not cutting spending from where it is today. We're reducing the rate of increase that is planned. So it's important that we tell the truth to the American people, that while this deal may be the best that we can do with the leadership in the White House or lack thereof, as well as the leadership or lack thereof here in the Senate, it may be the best political solution that we can get, but it does not solve America's problem. It certainly does not solve America's job problem, and it does nothing but add another $10 trillion to our debt if we're able to go that far. I will be voting against this bill because I do not believe we have 10 years to try to get it right. I think it's very likely over the next year or two or three that we're going to reach a very real debt limit when no one will lend us any more money. Today in America, we have to borrow $140 billion a month in order to pay our regular bills. And the people who are adding to that debt every month think it's extreme to balance your checkbook. It is time we get our house in order and force this Congress by the Constitution to balance its budget. We can't continue to spend more than we're bringing in and expect to reduce our debt. That's the inside Washington mentality. This deal is not a good deal for America. It may be the best deal that Washington can come up with the current leadership, but it puts our country at risk. But in a Washington where there is no leadership in the White House, there is no accountability, and there's someone sitting in the Oval Office who will not take responsibility for anything, this may be a deal that we have to accept for now. I intend to vote against it because it's important that we tell America the truth, that this puts our country at risk. It's time that we do what's best for America, not what makes the best deal here in Washington. I would encourage my colleagues to vote against this deal, even though I know they already have the votes. But I hope when this is passed that we will not think for 1 minute that we have solved the problem, that we will not try to convince Americans that now we have a few more years to spend and borrow without any repercussions. We need to immediately get back to the debate that was getting America involved the last election, which was balancing our budget and getting some fiscal sanity here in Washington. And while we're in desperate straits, I think, in our country right now, and we see our economy getting worse because of the policies of this administration, the good news is this: we can solve this problem with one more good election. And that's what I'm looking forward to, is taking my case to the American people and the case that they sent us up here to make to this Congress, that we need one more election to finish the job that they started in 2010. If they want us to get control of spending and borrowing and debt, we need a few more good people like the House freshmen who have stood their ground on this whole debate, and those that have come in here to the Senate and have led the way for a balanced budget. And it's that day I'm looking forward to, because on that day we will once again hopefully listen to America, get our house in order, balance our budget, and do what's best for our country. I thank you, Mr. President, and I yield back.